Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media. A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gornoski. So glad to be back with you for another journey through the news and headlines of our time, guided by personhood, not toxic groupthink. That means we're going to treat people as individuals to get a family-friendly society developed. We have to go back to the things that work, and that means personhood. What is personhood? You're like, what is that? It just means that you dignify the human being and you don't see them as a means to an end. Every ideology I see around us today wants to, basically flatten the human person and make it something that it's not, or make it, a part of a cog of a big machine or something like that. And I'm not interested in that. I want to really celebrate the diversity of individual contributions in this country. What makes us the best is when we give space for ideas to flourish in a world where people are told conformity is the best path to success. So conformity in and of itself is not a bad thing. Conforming to things that are good, conforming to a stop sign, right? Not just blazing through because you're a rugged individualist. That's a good thing. Conforming to the precedent that thou shalt not kill, that's a good thing. Conforming to the idea of not having envy or jealousy rule your heart, those are good things. And when you do those, if you conform rightly to those things, it opens up the door for you to be a free-thinking, joyful individual and so much stuff. It's interesting how that works. If you get a few foundational moral principles right from the beginning and you practice them and you refine them throughout your life, daily checking yourself and growing in wisdom, when that's our framework, we can then get into creative thinking and a whole host of different things. And it's exciting to see that happen, right? But there's this desire to, try to tell people what to do on every aspect and then to use the government to force people to do it. That's not a good thing. I want to talk about some broad themes that are happening in the conservative movement because I think it's an exciting time to be a part of the realignment taking place politically. You see it all around you. New coalitions are forming. Political identity and what that means is up in the air for change. But, one of the things that I think has to be drilled down towards is, okay, what are we doing? What's our goal? What's our aim? Where are we going with all this? And I think that conservatives spend too much time talking about policies and abstractions and not enough about the real human needs that people have and thinking in a big, bold vision. A lot of people think that, I've heard it said that, we need to have a big, robust government for certain things because that's what's holding back apocalypse. That's what's holding back anarchy. And at the same time, I don't understand where that framework is coming from when you look at the facts, when you look at reality. We've had a war on drugs for decades, for example. And has it got us anywhere? Have we gotten to a point where people are less addicted to drugs or more addicted to harder drugs that are more destructive than ever before? If you look at the war on poverty, using government to try to stamp out poverty, has it stopped poverty or has it created chaos? You look at what welfare has done to chase out fathers from homes. You look at government intervention in the world of marriage, making no-fault divorce cheap and easy and readily available to disintegrate the family structure. Once you break apart the family, it's like a revolutionary fervor opens up. You can start picking apart each member of the family and pitting them against each other. So what we're dealing with today, here's the bottom line. Human nature is sinful. Human nature is fallen. Human nature is going to go towards things that are warped by selfishness, warped by envy, warped by a desire for power and other things that humans typically want. It doesn't mean that we were made that way. We were made fundamentally good, but things went awry through history. And so that needs to be the first foundation from where we start. When we understand that God made us in his image, God made us as an act of free will. He was not forced to make us. God was not compelled or coerced to make us. And he was not compelled or coerced to make us in a specific way, but rather he chose to make us with free will, with free agency, knowing the risk could be that we could make a mess of things as we have done throughout history. And it's that radical risk of saying, you know what, I don't want robots. I want people to have a relationship with me and creation in themselves that they pursue and discover through their own initiative and their own risk-taking and their own desires and their own grace. That's what makes the journey of humanity so exciting. But there's a lot of folks who believe because humans have been choosing a path of nihilism and decadence and selfish individual obsessions, that it's time for a return to a robust, big government conservative approach. And they believe that it's okay to use certain Machiavellian purposes or ideas to achieve those purposes. I just find that very suspicious in general. People don't want to deal with Jesus as he really is. He says, my power is made perfect in weakness. And people say, oh, I'd prefer Constantine. Emperor Constantine was powerful. He wasn't weak. He did what he could to use his imperial power to move the nation and move people towards where he wanted them to go. But that's not where it ends up. You know, today we're, a long period of history away from the age of Emperor Constantine. But you know what? We see today that the way we look at history is much more informed than what Constantine had at his disposal when he converted to Christianity. And he himself knew that the actions of an emperor were somewhat antithetical to the vision of Christ. He knew it. And yet he tried to do what he could to achieve what he thought was the best. But that's a long time ago, right? That's over 1,000 years ago. And we've had a long period of history to grow as a human species, to grow and learn how better to build upon those foundations from the past. So the idea of looking to Constantine as a role model, I think, is naive and ridiculous. It's ahistorical. It's not taking into account what we have learned and built upon with Christian ethics and Christian broader pictures of history and what works and what doesn't work and how we can build a society that's more protective of individual liberties. But folks on the right are saying, you know what, we tried the whole individual liberty thing. Now we need big style emperor government to change all the ugliness in these oligarchs in the left. We need a powerful Caesar figure to come in and sweep out all the rot that has been infested in our society by these institutions which are captured by oligarchic groups of elitists. But the point is that that's not listening to what Jesus said in history. When Jesus says, do not resist evil with violence, it's not just in isolation to you and your individual life. It's not just about what you are supposed to do in relationship to your private life. It has everything to do with how the world will go. We have to learn to find nonviolent solutions as Jesus did in order to overcome tyranny. He wasn't speaking at a time in which he was not in tyranny, and therefore now that we're in tyrannical times, we have to throw out the way of Jesus and practice some other mild version of, like Constantine, some kind of outdated, naive version of Christianity practiced in the civic sphere. No. We need to take and learn from Constantine, but do something much, much more vigorously consistent with what Jesus was actually trying to get us to emulate in his life. He said God desires mercy, not sacrifice. And that was the theme that ran through everything he did in his life as he challenged powerful, corrupt leaders. I think that the conservative movement sounds oftentimes a lot like Peter going up to Jesus when he says that he will die on the cross. And he says, let it not be so. And Jesus responds, get behind me, accuser. You do not know the things that I have in mind, that I'm doing. Calls him accuser. He calls him Satan. And I think there's a lot of folks, and we all have it. It's not just others. It's me too. There's a lot of folks that say, you know what? We need to have big government or something to stop all this ugliness that we see around. Inflation through the roof, chaos in education, lawlessness on the streets, broken families, decadent, ridiculous carnival spectacles with kids brought into adult bars where it's disgusting. Celebration of massive obesity as an aim to health. I saw Kanye West mention that in his interview with Tucker Carlson last night. How the culture wants us to emulate being massively obese. Not that you should be shamed or disrespected if you have a problem, but that idea that that should be something we strive towards is sick. PUFA seed oils cause the epidemic of obesity. Fact. And people who are obese are poisoned by that, toxified by that, and perhaps other downstream effects from that. And the idea of telling young women, keep gaining weight, keep getting massively obese, and all the things that are associated with that, this is like revenge of the nerds Christianity, you know, because Christianity makes space for people who are forgotten. Christianity is what comes along and says, you know what? Yes, that one's a supermodel, but we don't tell this person who's overweight or obese that you're a disgusting pig. You don't say that to people. And the right takes that bait from the left all the time and says, yeah, I like supermodel-looking women, and that obese woman is a nasty, disgusting, horrible person, right? They play into the satanic trap of the world. We're not to be those people. We're to be adults. And that means we don't valorize things that are problems, but we don't also demonize people either. And Christianity helps us have that kind of balanced perspective when we're imitating Jesus, right? He would condemn things that were not right, but he also wouldn't, scapegoat and marginalize people who didn't look the same way. People who were a leper. The religious conservatives of his time would say that those lepers are deserving of their fate, that they're a bunch of disgusting pigs. And Jesus wouldn't do the leftist thing of saying, no, lepers, that's how we should valorize. Everybody should look like a leper. Now, come on, everybody, let's try to get leprosy so we can all be part of this, a powerful, majestic victim cult. No, he didn't do that. He said, no, this is a problem. We're not going to ostracize them. We're not going to push them out to the margins like you conservative bigots have done. He didn't call them bigots, that's me. But we're going to deal with them as they are, a human being. And we're actually going to get rid of the problem. We're going to heal them of this disease. The left wants to say, let's make everybody have leprosy, or let's demonize people who don't have leprosy and say you are privileged because you don't have leprosy, so therefore shame on you, shame on you. Vogue magazine is going to be filled with nothing but lepers with their nose and everything having problems. But they only get that energy because those who say they're Christians and those who say they're conservative believers have given them that dialectical, reciprocal space because they've taken the bait and said, nasty, dirty leper. And that's the case for absolutely everything you see in our society today that's gone awry. With the LGBT movement, everything. It's all the same playbook I just explained with the metaphor of the leper. And I am tired of conservatives saying that they've got it figured out because they're going to embrace some kind of Christian nationalism. This is treating Christianity like some kind of luggage that you put in the back of your van as some kind of talisman that has some nice nostalgia and some social currency to it because it commands good moral behavior. That is not at all the true picture of Christianity. Christianity does have moral expectations, but it's much, much bigger than that. It subverts empires. It inspires scientific discoveries. It dares to defy the curse of death. It begins in a garden. It ends in a city. It is about healing the nations from diseases and sickness and healing relationships between generational pains and generational grievances. It's about taking people who are bullies and those who are bullied and sorting it out and making the lion lay down with the lamb, not through force, but through overwhelming demonstrations of grace that are so irresistible people will want to sing about it for centuries. Why do you think we have psalms sung about thousands of years in history? That's what Christianity is about. It's about dreaming big, but it's about doing things in a way that are kind and loving and beautiful in the way that Jesus is. Not meek and milquetoast in the way you think. As you've been told Jesus is. Jesus was bold. Jesus said direct things. Jesus challenged the corrupt hypocrites. He did not mince words, but he also had a way of undermining people's expectations in tit-for-tat rivalries. He knew how to go in between the conservatives and the liberals or whatever, the sellout establishment and the populace. He knew how to go into the midst of that and upset everybody's expectations. And if we would learn to imitate that as Christians today, we would solve so many of these intractable cultural wars and political stalemates that end in decay. So I don't believe that the catacon or the thing that is holding back chaos in our life is government. I don't believe that. But I also don't believe that you can just snap your fingers and dissolve government and everybody's fine either. I believe that property and human voluntary interactions working out things together is the catacon. That's the foundation for civilization, culture, because people voluntarily working together is how you get works of art. That's how you get poetry. That's how you get the engineering designs. Now, yes, some of these things do happen alongside government intervention, but it's not necessity that you have government to get to those engineering feats that happen with government money. They would actually happen even better if people were able to allocate resources in a more competitive and free-flowing way. But we're far long away from that on so many levels of our country. But at the same time, we have a lot of aspects of that nonviolent social interaction order still functioning very well today. That's how you have a high trust society. That's how you get to a place where you can have win-win solutions. We have a society that says government has to define marriage. There needs to be a government license to get married. And then guess what? Government takes that license and slowly but surely destroys the foundation of marriage, making marriage a silly joke of what it should be. And conservatives say, we need to get government to license marriage this way. No, you need to get government the hell out of marriage, period. That is a loser's game to say, let me go to government, a monopoly on violence, and say, hey, please tell us what marriage is. I had no idea until you can define it for us. See, that's the problem with conservatives, is that they think that the government is the place in which you can make norms a thing in society, that you have to have government edicts in order to proclaim something as the way things should be. And that is false. Normative claims, how things ought to be, preclude any state that's ever existed in human history. It's natural law. It's the way God made us. In Adam and Eve, they did not have a government, but they had a relationship with their Creator, and there were certain expectations. Don't eat of that fruit. There were boundaries, right? There were normative claims of how things ought to be that they were given without having some giant central authority to manage it for them. The Bible has always critiqued empire. The Bible has always subverted people's faith in using preemptive violence of the state to achieve some kind of stable peace. The Bible condemns that worldview when it says, when it quotes Caiaphas, the high priest who was leading the charge to kill Jesus, who said, "It is better that one man die than the whole nation perish." That kind of mentality is antithetical to living as a Christian. That does not mean that you have to retreat from the world. That does not mean that you have to live in an Amish state or something like that. I'm not saying that. There's a way to work through this in an incremental way. But the idea that the Christian should just settle for, it's better that one man die than a whole nation perish. I agree on this policy. Let's let a few perish for this, or let's let a few perish for that. Let's do this. You've sold out. You've become just like the persecutors of Christ. And what is the point of living if you knowingly know something is wrong and do it anyways? That's missing the mark of an abundant life. And there is no distinction between your individual private life and the public square, because what you do and what you find to be right and wrong as an individual is extended to the collective as well. If it's right or wrong for you to put your knee on the back of someone's neck because they got high, it's right or wrong if you hire somebody else to do that on your behalf and call it a law. I don't care who told you it's okay to do it. We don't listen to peer pressure. We do what our conscience is told to do by a creator that nudges us and makes it clear how we are to treat people the way he treats us. Using preemptive violence to coerce people to make conscious choices that are good does not produce good moral choices. It produces an underground of resentment, an underground of a black market, and that black market comes in many shapes and forms. You can have the black market of drug war, which creates obscene profits for the most antisocial, violent people to take advantage of, which wouldn't happen without a drug war, which gives power to gangs. And you can also have black markets when it comes to hate or racial animosity or gender conflict, because you try to prescriptively make a coercive power play from the government to stamp something out. We'll unpack this as we continue live on A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gornoski. You can call in at 727-587-1040. That's 727-587-1040, or email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. So you'll see it juxtaposed in conservative conversations, especially online, that if you got two camps. You can be pro liberty, which means you're supposed to not have any concerns for, tradition or family friendly values or order or hierarchy, which is totally a joke to say that. And then there's this, oh, well, if you're for social cohesion and you're for tradition and family and hierarchical, differences and so forth, then you are supposed to be for a big, robust, use of government power to fix all the chaos of the reigning order of leftist government. That's a total farce. Those things are not in opposition to one another. They simply aren't. I can just list a few different examples of that. You don't have to be, in fact, centralized big government is what predates and creates the chaos we have today in social situations. Let's just go through a random list of things, not in any particular order. Government creating no-fault divorce, getting government to have a license, getting government to grant you a license, getting government to then say, okay, from that standpoint, we get to determine the rules by which this should be dealt with. Now, if you had it the way it used to be in the earlier periods of America, your church or institution that you go to could say, we will grant, a covenantal agreement or preside over instituting a covenantal agreement between people, right? And then that institution and their rules for how they view marriage would be the court system, so to speak. Churches have court systems all the time for, church discipline goes up to national government structures in some denominations. Some do local. But to have that patchwork of options again was that's the way America used to be. But that means if you go to a church that has certain rules for how you view the sanctity of marriage, then those are the ways you look at it. You could go to another group and get a marriage covenant agreement from a group that would say, no, yeah, the moment you see somebody you like better than your spouse, you're free to go. And then those are the terms that they go by. But having actual contract with terms that are voluntarily agreed upon and that are in alignment with the views of the parties, and having, a robust, experience in the community of other people finding success with those agreements from that institution would be a way of dealing with that and getting government out of the way of slicing and dicing the family, because that's at the heart of what's going on. If you go online, you'll see videos on social media of youth running around in cities punching and kicking and, storming into, gas stations and, buildings and so forth. And you see crime going through the roof, and you see people in San Francisco strung out on drugs. But at the foundation is a issue of human beings saying they imitate Jesus, saying they put their trust in God, but yet turning to trust in man to determine what a contract of marriage should look like and how it should be functioned, how it should be mediated. And look at the chaos that has resulted from that. Broken families, out-of-wedlock births, all these different chaos things that have happened. Welfare state has a big place. Government intervening in welfare, putting welfare in and chasing out the father out of the home. Of making a financial incentive for women to dislocate the father and for the man to say, oh, to heck with it, this is too hard to wipe diapers and work extra hours to pay the bills with all these extra mouths and all the stress that comes with that. I guess I'll just head on out. She's saying she don't want me anyways because the government's going to give her a better check than me. This sick intervention of government as God destroying the family. And you look at other things. Government schooling, centralized control, one-size-fits-all government monopoly schooling, designed after the Prussian model. This is not the way education used to be in the earlier days of founders. There was much, much more patchwork of diverse options, and those options which were more virtuous and excellent tended to be the ones that succeeded. But today we have this bureaucratic rot of all these people making six figures in all these bureaucratic roles, and the resources are just trickled little crumbs left for the teacher, and the teacher has to give a cookie-cutter 50-minute education for each subject. If the kid is in the middle of learning something profound or finishing the final lines of a poem, he's supposed to stop immediately as soon as the bell rings to trigger, get up, pack your stuff up, run quickly to the next class that he has no interest in, or she. Conformity. Dislocating the child away from the family. It doesn't mean the kid has to be in the homeschool or that, but having a more smaller micro school with friends and people that you trust and families that have a similar worldview, a similar view of how things should go in terms of educational philosophy. That's where excellence can rise to the occasion. That's where diverse thinking can come about. That's where little laboratories can spring up around this country. But instead, conservatives have done nothing to get rid of the Department of Education. They've done nothing to truly allow a free market in education to flourish. But there are some margins of change taking place in that regard. That's good. Another thing is Social Security. And conservatives are so fixated on politics that they've normalized the idea that you can't talk about the truth of Social Security. You see what I mean? The conservative movement is so fixated on winning elections instead of actually developing a robust worldview that people can get to be a part of, that it can't even spend its time talking about real serious problems. Social Security will not be there for people who are young when they retire. That's one of the most obvious versions. But there's a different thing about Social Security. The idea of Social Security has dislocated elders from their children, because Social Security comes along with Medicare and these other programs that end up allowing people to warehouse their elders in nursing homes where government pays for everything, and dislocates the care of your mother and father from the responsibility of the children. So the children have more time to be self-absorbed narcissists trying to compete with the Joneses for the better paycheck so they can go on their sixth cookie-cutter trip to Hawaii or some cruise. I'm not against cruises or Hawaii. We're making points here. But the idea of Social Security being something that has severed the relationship before Social Security and these government interventions that always have a wonderful little myth that allows them to be so enticing at first. And there are real reasons. Social Security used to be that people would, get it at the time right before they would die. So it wasn't like decades of this. But then you have Medicare, right? Another invention of government intervention that, again, breaks away. So the kid says, okay, see you later. Mom, you're in Idaho. Dad, you're in wherever. See you later. I'm going off to the big city. See you later. Oh, you ended up in, let's get him in a nursing home. How's that, those assets going? How's that stuff I'm going to inherit going to go? I know people don't talk like that explicitly, but that oftentimes ends up being the mindset that creeps in. Oh, whatever the medical professionals say at the nursing home. And, of course, you get people saying, I'm pushing back against the nursing home treatment. But by and large, there's this warehouse medicalization of the elderly, which is despicable in the eyes of God. Human beings should be in touch with their elders. That's what honoring your father and your mother is all about. That you stay with it doesn't mean that you have to do all the care. We get that there's extreme situations. And there's occasions where people want to live in an elderly community. Okay, that's fine. If that person does so on their own desire and they truly want it and of sound mind, or perhaps they're in such a debilitated state that the persons that are able to take care of them simply cannot do certain things. I get that. But the point is, having a centralized system of Medicare and Social Security has done a lot to disintegrate the idea of people being in touch with their elders and taking care of people. And that, if you were in touch with your elders, then those elders would have more of an impact on you throughout the older periods of your life, and that elderly connection would have more of an impact on your children, and therefore the past and the good values and lessons learned from wisdom from elders would be passed down to the young easier. But there's a dislocation, just like there's a dislocation with government schooling. Oh, you're only supposed to be sequestered with your age group. And I hear these little clowns, these fake little conservative hoity-toity people in D.C., they know nothing about conservatives, but they like to talk a big game. Oh, we need to robustly invest in community colleges or whatever. No, we need to have options, of free market options in schooling thrive. That's the answer. Because when I went to community college, I saw nothing but liberal, idiotic ideology is being pushed into even small-town community colleges. They don't know that in D.C. They just sit around and pontificate because they've never had a real job. Telling me, oh, the way we get the working class, we're going to spend more federal funding for community colleges. That is the dumbest thing in the world. It doesn't mean that community colleges are bad, but the idea that you can tinker around with funding flows and that somehow will change your culture is absolute hogwash. Community colleges are fine in some cases, but they are also infected with a centralized worldview that goes with those federal funds. And you're not going to be able to root them out by banning CRT or these stupid little gimmicks. You get that worldview to you one way or another when your whole model is a monopoly. The reason, these people talk a big game about, oh, rugged individualism is what's caused us to be atomized and lose our ability to frickin' have kids with robust Christian virtues. No, it's not just that. You sent your kids off to government school till they're 18. When they came home from school, they had an hour or 2 hours of homework a night. Then they're glued to the TV or smartphones or TikTok the rest of the time. They get 30 minutes of interaction with you at dinner, and that's it. How the hell do you expect them to have the values that you had when you were young or at your best or whatever it is you want to pass down? Your government's educating your child. Your government's shaping the worldview, and they're creating mass conformity. And then you wonder why it gets worse and worse, the results through schooling. And same thing for college. So yeah, throwing money at a community college is not going to do anything to change it. Opening up to make it more competitive for the good, just like we want competition, micro schools, and all these different ideas flourishing in the young college, in the young school age. We also want it for college age education. That's what I'm doing on A Neighbor's Choice. You could get a PhD in different subjects, so to speak, with some of the experts that we have interviewed for years on this program and archived and cataloged for you for free. You look at things like the Federal Reserve. 1913, we passed the Federal Reserve Act. It's told that we have to have this because the market is creating wild bank runs. It was a total fiction. The folks that were supposed to rein in, the big bankers, were actually the ones behind it, but they did this clever bait and switch campaign where they went out in the public and made it look like they were opposed to the Federal Reserve Act when in reality they were for it, which made the people more acquiescent to it being passed. It was passed during the Christmas break in 1913. Woodrow Wilson signed it in. Income tax also happened. Two horrible things. But what that did was it started this pathway of debasing our currency. Again, destroying the fabric of communities and families. Because instead of being able to incentivize saving, a debased currency that loses its purchasing power through the decades incentivizes mindless consumerism. I think about what I do today. I mean, I'm not into the financial stuff. I think every time I put money in the bank, if 10% inflation or higher in some goods, you're wiping out yourself. So you have to go invest in these dangerous government-inflated stock picks and go get some guru to be your financial manager if you want to have some kind of retirement or some kind of money when you're, in a bad spot. And what does that do? Then the recessions come, the stock market falls apart, you lose everything. And what did you have to show for it? You spent your whole life being a consumerist because you didn't have a simple ability to put money away and that money to actually gain value over time. I asked that to my barber the other day. I said, wouldn't it be great if you could just put money in the bank and then it gains more value and you can actually buy more stuff with it? You put $500 a month or whatever, you do what you can. And over time, guess what? You can buy more stuff with that. Isn't that amazing? That's the way an economy is supposed to function when it has honest weights and measures. When it has a money that actually has value attached to it with limited scarcity to it. People say there's not enough gold in the world to account for all the money. That's stupid, okay? Very dumb. We're not going to get into that, but that is a very dumb thing. Economists, I can bring on again to explain how that works. So we need to have money that's backed by something, and it doesn't mean we have to force it. We need to allow competition in currency. We need to allow people to save their money in gold and silver-based accounts so that their money doesn't get destroyed when currencies get inflated, which means if you saved your money now, you don't have to be a consumerist. Every month you can be like, you know what, I'm going to save a little bit more of my paycheck, because our money is appreciating in value, and now I can buy more things over the time. So I can buy a house without having to be in debt. I can, or, you know, you can buy a car or something without being totally in debt. So you've got things like no-fault divorce. You've got things like the welfare state. You've got things like government schooling, Social Security, Medicare. You've got the Federal Reserve debasing currency, promoting consumerism. That's not free markets promoting consumerism. Yeah, you can point to a bunch of fraudulent Republicans and some Cato think tank group people no one cares about talking about stuff they know nothing about, but they don't challenge the Federal Reserve. And yeah, they'll tell you that what we have is this free market stuff, but that's not what this is about. This is about a system of government managing money and promoting consumeristic habits that destroy a civilization over time because there's no long-term planning. If you don't teach people to save, they don't think of the future. And they don't think about, wait a second, Granddaddy built this road. Granddaddy built this plumbing system. If I don't learn to support people who have those skill sets, or at least learn those skill sets myself, we ain't going to have a road. We ain't going to have a plumbing system when things get down the road. That's what a future perspective gives you. That's what a Christian perspective gives you, because the Bible begins in a garden and it ends in a city. That's what teaches you to have money that actually has value, so it appreciates in value over time. Imagine that. The Bible says honest weights and measures. That means you have a currency backed by something, and you don't coerce people into using your currency for your stupid conservative central planning ideas, dumb as can be. Conservatives talk a big game about tariffs. You know, tariffs. We need tariffs. We need industrial policy to bring back manufacturing. Okay. How about this? You actually follow the Constitution and get rid of the income tax, and we'll talk about replacing whatever shortfalls need to be covered with tariffs. That's what people need. But right now, you get half of your income is stolen through inflation, state taxes, local taxes, and the income tax, which is insult to injury, because with withholding, they give you a piece back of what they think you should have, as Ron Paul used to say. And that means they own your body, and they give you a piece of what they want you to have back as a tip. So we can do tariffs to make it more fair for manufacturing, but we're not going to do tariffs when we've got an income tax that ends up helping us end up making half of our life every year as a slave. Not happening. So you look into things like the FDA monopolizing what is a food and what is a drug. And what have they done? They have pushed psychotropic drugs into children. They've pushed psychotropic drugs into families and moms and so forth, where people are devastated by the effects. This same food system has told us to replace what mom or grandma used to cook with butter, beef lard, things like that, and replace it with vegetable oils, which has, again, contributed to, scientifically, you can demonstrate this, as we have done many times, contributed to the decline and moral values, created alienation, created aggressive tendencies. Look at the studies they've done with prisoners when their omega-6 fat content is so high. It agitates, it alienates, it creates aggravations. Your hormones matter, and when you're making an ugly mess of them, it will manifest in problems in social cohesion. Imagine that. Little conservative and populist think tank, when you're so stuck on policies licking the boot of D.C. that you don't even understand how omega-6 is affecting some of this social forces that you seem so overwhelmed by. You look at things like affirmative action, where the government intervenes into the market again and starts creating these situations where excellence is diminished, where people of different races are disrespected and patronized, and where inefficiencies and alienation between different racial groups starts to be intensified. Inefficiencies in the workforce, excellence goes down, and division happens when affirmative action becomes this thing, because folks disrespect, folks get resentment, and then you have situations where people are not hiring for the best, but rather for some kind of token attaboy on the back of political correctness. You see? You've also got the issue of war. War is the health of the state, and our government would not be as bloated as it is if it wasn't for its choosing of the Wilsonian, never-ending war state. Wars tear families apart. When you go overseas and you're in a base, it is a place where a lot of things end up wrecking families, wrecking marriages. Adultery, things like that start to happen when people, you got all these young men all around the world in different bases, and there's this power imbalance between the country that's got the base and the people who are to accommodate that base. But you talk about disintegration, you talk about the rates of divorce, you talk about when they go to war, the moral hazard that happens, the things that happen to the conscience. When you end up seeing your friends blown apart, and then you find out, wait a second, this war was based on a lie. These scoundrels lied to us again. And then what that does to your heart when you see those images of people brutally maimed on both sides of the conflict, and you see what that does to your heart, and then you come back and it's just this little token, hey, or whatever. And you have to go throughout life picking up the kids from school with all those noises, those extreme traumas all built in, and people not having an effective way to talk about what was really going on. That's why we did the veteran segment, and we will do more and more veteran segments in the future. But war has broken apart families. It's injured families. It's created people to have PTSD, and then they come home, and because they don't get proper treatment for it, sometimes they pass it down to other kids, and divorces and other things happen. How about abortion? Government making up the right to abort another human being because they're small and you don't see them, and their spinal cord is not as big as yours, and they're in an inconvenient place. And so you say, hey, you know what? Government's going to be your God again, and you can put your trust in us, and we'll protect you from the responsibilities and the difficulties of raising children. Everything I've just suggested to you are interventions of government. I don't want to hear another word from some phony conservative or some little populist nationalist who thinks we need more government intervention to solve the problems of the heart and to solve the problems of the family. Now, I'm all for charisma. I'm all for confidence. I'm all for strategy. I'm all for thinking incrementally. I get that. But let's be honest with who the false gods of this country have been. Let's be honest with the clear vision of Jesus. Do not be like the pagans who lord over others. Desire mercy, not sacrifice. And that is a way you defeat power, by allowing power to fall on its own face, to fall on its own overexertion, and to be a witness to a future so exciting, so surprising, it will continue to upset the foundations of every civilization that witnesses it. That's our calling. I'm David Gornoski. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. In the next hour, we'll hear from Scott Horton. But for now, Godspeed.